Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week as always. And as always, I'd like to thank the following people that sent me messages, tagged me, linked me, whatever it was to get me this information, and that is Jason Dance, Jacqueline Wolf, Chris Fallon, David Walker, and Barrett Peterson. Guys, thank you so much. And if you have a tip for me, I'm more than happy to give you a shout out here and on the air as well. Now, with that, we're actually going to be starting today off with a correction, and I think this is an important note as well. Now, I'm going to be talking about the Parler breach in my very last segment here because I think it's interesting to watch unfold. It's obviously a data breach, and I also want to talk about how that information is being used by law enforcement and prosecutors, but I want to set the record straight first. Now, a few days ago, I actually did 2 videos on this, as well as podcasts, and so one was called, Can Parler's Hack Data Be Used for Prosecutions? And the next one that I did was Parler's hack data is starting to reveal serious legal problems for its users. Now, in both cases, the analysis and quotes that I used from a state prosecutor are still absolutely correct, nor has my opinion changed on this situation that I stated in those videos and podcasts. But what has changed as new information started to come in was that this wasn't actually a hack. There were multiple early reports by reputable sources, and usually when I'm going through stuff like this, I'm picking out multiple sources, and I tell you the one I primarily crib from. I say it's multiple sources, but I'm cribbing from the New York Times, take your pick. So there were multiple sources reporting on this early that were stating that people were able to exfiltrate Parler data because of a weakened API, and they're basically able to get into the platform and then create multiple administrator accounts, which allowed them to maintain persistence when they were essentially copying everything out. We are now learning essentially that weakened API actually had no authentication whatsoever, so that these people that actually did this did not actually break into or hack into the platform. They simply connected to the API just like anybody could if you had the knowledge, which gave them access at an administrative level. That is not a crime because they didn't actually break in. You can call it a violation of privacy or of Parler's user privacy or of Parler's administrative privacy, but it is not actually a hack. This would be akin, for example, to you having a house made completely of glass, for example, or a transparent house, and I walk by on the street and I see all of your stuff, and I decide to pull out my phone and take a picture of it. I didn't kick in your door, and your choice of not putting up curtains or any kind of barrier is not my fault. You're exposing that for the world to see. You may be annoyed that I took that picture, but technically I didn't do anything wrong, and here we are. And I say all of this to say that I'm always going to be transparent with everyone here. If I get something wrong, I am happy to own it, because the most important thing basically for me here is to be accurate with you guys. And so as some people pointed out a couple of days after I pointed those videos in comments to say, hey, this wasn't a hack, I started correcting that in comments, but I figured because I'm going to be talking about Parler's breach today and breaches of the week, this was a good place to start. And with that, let's actually get to the breaches, because there were quite a few this week outside of Parler, and we're going to start with Chinese social media management company Larks. Now, they suffered a huge data leak leading to the exposure of over 400 gigabytes of personal data, including several high-profile celebrities and social media influencers. The company's unsecured Elasticsearch database contained personally identifiable information from at least 214 million social media users from around the world, on both regular platforms like Facebook and Instagram, as well as professional networks like LinkedIn. The Elasticsearch server was basically publicly exposed without a password or any kind of encryption, and so essentially anybody could get into this. And obviously I think this really also underscores just how easy it is to scrape data from Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., etc. So heads up, you may actually be in a Chinese social media management company's unsecured database, Larks. Moving on, let's talk about networking device maker Ubiquiti. They said, and I quote in their email to their customers that went widely around, and I got basically 800 copies of this from people, and thank you all. We are not currently aware of evidence of access to any databases that host user data, but we cannot be certain that user data was not exposed. This may include your name, email address, and the one-way encrypted password to your account. In technical terms, passwords are hashed and salted. The data may also include your address and phone number if you provided that to us. So, heads up, if you have a Unify account in the cloud with Ubiquiti and are not managing it locally, you may be essentially hit. Please enable 2FA. Moving on, let's talk about the Environmental Regulator of Scotland, or SEPA. Basically, they're saying criminals are demanding a ransom to unlock their systems, which have been subjected to a cyber attack, which happened on Christmas Eve and apparently went beyond that. Now, cybersecurity specialists have identified the theft of about 1.2 gigabytes of data, with indicators suggesting that at least 4,000 files may have been accessed and stolen. The company's internal communications have also been locked out, but critical services such as flood forecasting and warning so far have not been affected. They are suspecting Russian organized crime, so hopefully SEPA will get back on their feet soon. Moving on, let's talk about the Police National Computer out of the United Kingdom. Some 150,000 arrest records, including fingerprints, DNA, and arrest histories, were accidentally wiped from police databases last week in a major, what they're calling, technological glitch that could impact future investigations. They don't suspect foul play from what I understand, but I'm just wondering if they had backups, and if they didn't, why not? Because that's obviously a huge thing. And imagine being a criminal and just having your DNA and your fingerprints magically erased from the police computer. There you go. You're walking off scot-free. Moving on, we unfortunately have to talk about the United Nations because researchers have disclosed a security vulnerability, essentially that could have gained access to 100,000 private employee records of the United Nations Environmental Program, or UNEP. The data breach stemmed from an exposed Git directory and credentials, which allowed researchers to clone the Git repositories and then gather a large amount of personally identifiable information associated with these employees. The UN has quickly fixed this problem, and hopefully no threat actors have access to data, but it is likely that they have. Moving on. Let's talk about the U.S. State Department, and you're probably going to find this amusing, or you might not, depending on what side of the political aisle you're on, because apparently on the U.S. State Department website, the biographies of outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence were mysteriously changed on the official U.S. State Department website on Monday, January 11th. Visitors that went to www.state.gov were unable to view facts about the two politicians, as somebody appeared to have mysteriously removed them, only to replace them with a solitary line detailing that it's the end of their term. And it read as in full, and I quote, Donald J. Trump's term ended on 2021-01-11, 7:45 p.m. and 55 seconds. So according to BuzzFeed News, this was a disgruntled employee at the U.S. State Department, basically, and they are responsible for these unauthorized changes. And so I think they're looking to get that back online if it hasn't been already. Obviously, the term for both President Trump and Vice President Pence ends in about 72 hours or so on January 20th. Moving on, let's talk about Mimecast. This is the massive spam filter solution. Earlier this week, Mimecast confirmed that an attacker had compromised a certificate provided to certain customers to authenticate Mimecast products into Microsoft 365 Exchange web services. The tools and techniques used in this attack link these operators to those who recently targeted SolarWinds, and I will be giving you a SolarWinds update here as well. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, Mimecast was a SolarWinds customer in the past, but no longer uses the Orion software. That's the software that got hit, and that is according, again, to a person familiar with this matter. The company has not determined how the hackers got in or its earlier use of SolarWinds that could have left it vulnerable. And so we'll see if this is tied to SolarWinds, but heads up, a handful of Mimecast customers got hit. So if you're on them, you might want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about Amazon Ring, specifically their Neighbors app, because a security flaw in that app was exposing the precise locations and home addresses of users who had posted to the app. Now, while the users' posts are public, the app doesn't display names or precise locations, though most include video taken by Ring doorbells and security cameras. The bug made it possible to retrieve location data of users who posted to the app, including those who were actually reporting crimes. But the exposed data wasn't visible to anyone using the app. Rather, the bug was retrieving hidden data, including the user's latitude and longitude, their home address, and other information from Ring's servers. Another problem was that every post was tied to a unique number generated by the server that incremented by 1 each time a user created a post. Although the number was hidden from view, the sequential numbering system made it much easier to enumerate the location data from previous posts, even from users who weren't geographically nearby. So I think that's obviously a huge problem. Hopefully Amazon will fix this. This is definitely not the first exposure that we've seen or vulnerability that we've seen in Ring. And so hopefully they'll get that patched up. But heads up if you use Ring's Neighbors app. Moving on, let's talk about the Puget Sound Educational District. Obviously in Puget Sound area, unauthorized people accessed an unknown number of staff and student emails on more than one occasion between last spring and summer. These emails included sensitive data such as names, birth date, social security numbers, bank account information, and medical records. And so heads up if you are basically have a school in the Puget Sound Educational District. Moving on, let's talk about Gainwell Technologies LLC. They are a business associate of the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, or DHS, and they announced that an unauthorized individual may have exposed information of participants in Wisconsin's Medicaid program. Now, Gainwell said that the individual gained access to the account on October 29th of 2020 and may have exposed members' names, identification numbers, and billing codes. On January 15th, notifications were mailed to 1,281 Wisconsin Medicaid members whose information may have been accessed. So heads up if you are on Wisconsin Medicaid, just north of me. Moving on, let's head on down to Australia and talk about the Queensland Police Service of Australia, because they are apologizing after a data breach revealed the personal details of licensed gun owners in the Moreton district. Now, obviously, Australia has a very strict gun control policy, so this is a huge deal. Now, the breach occurred in an email to gun owners about firearm security after a number of break-ins in the area. The recipients' names and email addresses weren't concealed in the email, meaning they didn't blind copy all of the gun owners. They just basically CC'd them all. Now, the Moreton District Officer Superintendent John Hallam said investigations showed human error was the cause of this breach, and it affected more than 1,200 email addresses for these gun owners. So heads up if you live in the Moreton area in Queensland, Australia, and you own a gun. Moving on, let's talk about Blackbaud. This is the breach that keeps on breaching, like so many other breaches in 2020. And so we have a new organization that has basically been declaring a Blackbaud breach as of right now, and that would be the University of New Haven in Connecticut. So heads up if you donate or have anything to do with the University of New Haven. And finally, and we have 3 big finalies for you that I think are going to take a while to unpack. The first one we're going to be talking about is actual vaccine data, because the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, has reported that some of the data of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine that had been stolen during a cyber attack in early 2020, and I did report on that. They're saying that was released online illegally shortly after the attack. Now, the leak was discovered during an investigation that was launched into the attack by the EMA and law enforcement. It is claimed that evidence of the stolen data was found on various hacking forums as early as December 31st, or New Year's Eve. The EMA stated on January 13th that basically action was being taken by the authorities. Both Pfizer and BioNTech then released a joint statement outlining the nature of this breach, and I quote, "Today we were informed by the European Medicines Agency that the agency has been subject to a cyber attack and that some documents relating to the regulatory submission for Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine candidate, which has been stored on an EMA server, had been unlawfully accessed." And so hopefully those aren't the keys to the kingdom. The last thing we want is basically somebody trying to half-ass a vaccine, or another company obviously taking credit for their hard work. We are all in this mess together. And my other finally is SolarWinds update. And again, we will be getting to Parler. They're my finally. But let's talk about SolarWinds, because even though we have all this mess going on, this is still just a bomb dropping for cybersecurity, not to mention national security of multiple countries. A website named SolarLeaks is apparently selling data they claim was stolen from companies confirmed to have been breached in the SolarWinds attack. Now, here's what's going on. The website was launched and claims to be selling stolen data from Microsoft, Cisco, FireEye, and SolarWinds itself. All of these companies have been known, as I mentioned, to be breached during the supply chain attack and have basically publicly disclosed that as well. The website claims to be selling Microsoft source code and repositories for $600,000 US. Microsoft confirmed that threat actors had access to their source code during the SolarWinds breach, but Microsoft also said that it basically hadn't been altered, at least on their systems, and so maybe they were able to copy it out, and here we are. Microsoft Windows, partial source code, and various Microsoft repositories basically are what is being for sale. The threat actors are also claiming to be selling the source code for multiple Cisco products, and even more concerning, the company's internal bug tracker. That's essentially how they are looking at all the vulnerabilities in their products and what is basically to be done to start closing these holes, meaning that is a roadmap to an exploitation of probably every major Cisco enterprise and business product out there. And according to the actual listing, it says Cisco multiple product source code plus internal bug tracker dump, $500,000 US. So in an advisory, Cisco stated that they are aware of the SolarWinds site and there is no evidence, or they're saying rather, that there's no evidence that the attackers actually stole their source code. And to quote Cisco, Cisco is aware of this website and has no evidence at this time of any theft of intellectual property related to recent events. We are committed to transparency, and should we find information our customers need to be aware of, we will share it through our established channels. Now, the website is also claiming to sell private red team tools and source code that FireEye disclosed were stolen during the attack for $50,000, and that description is from the official advertisement on the dark web. FireEye private red team tools, source code binaries, and documentation, $50,000 US. Finally, the website sells SolarWinds source code in a dump of the customer portal for $250,000, which is basically in the description of the advertisement here that I've got screenshots of. It says all including Orion. And essentially for $1 million, the website says you'll get all of it. So if you want Cisco and you want Microsoft and you want SolarWinds, but wait, there's more. For $1 million, the low price, you can get all of that data. Now, this is a style that is very similar to what the shadow brokers did a few years ago, which is essentially they stole NSA tools and wanted to essentially say, hey, we'll sell you per tool or we'll sell you the whole thing, for a set amount of price. Now, these SolarWinds actors state that they will be selling the stolen data in batches, and more will be released at a later date. That's exactly what the shadow brokers did as well. It is not confirmed if this site is legitimate or if the site actually or if the owners rather have the data they are selling. But this really gets interesting because I've been doing my homework on this. On January 13th, a reporter for Motherboard by Vice, Lorenzo Franceschi Biacchieri, and I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, received an email claiming to be from the SolarLeaks actors. He asked to provide a sample of the allegedly stolen data. The actors actually refused to offer any proof, saying it's not, quote, this simple. They stated, as that reporter put out, quote, yes, it could, but this isn't this simply. Not everything you read online is true. Many intrusions inside SolarWinds, we were one of them. Meaning, if they are 100% true, if they actually have what they say they have, they are claiming that they were one of multiple. Now, we know from the SolarWinds breach, just end the reporting and all of that, we know that at least two independent groups, one of them has been repeatedly identified as APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat 29, also known as Cozy Bear, out of Russia. And there is another group that also has been in there. This could be that other group, or a third group, or a fourth, or a fifth. SolarWinds, as we know, was playing it very fast and loose with their security and authentication, having a password of all lowercase SolarWinds 123 that they were warned of in 2019. And so it's very possible that everybody was crawling through their network. Whether it was a sophisticated attempt or not, it seemed pretty easy to get in. And speaking of easy things to get into, let's talk about the finally thing that we need to talk about, which is Parler. And I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts of this because I obviously done videos on this, and despite my correction in the front about being a hack, everything else appears to be correct, even though it wasn't a criminal hack and they got in very easily. Let's go through this because what we're learning on this is absolutely crazy. Now, as I mentioned above, Essentially, a self-proclaimed hacker from Austria and her cohorts that helped her were able to easily get into the Parler system. The security was so weak, basically no password or authentication, that anyone with knowledge could have walked into the system and simply gotten administrative access. If you know how to connect to an API, you too, like me, could have gotten access as well. They started copying out as much of the data as they could, which amounted to just under 70 terabytes from multiple sources that I've read that on, before Amazon decided to actually kill the infrastructure hosting for Parler and take them offline to the public. Now, on January 10th, the person that leaked this tweeted out various things, and I'm going to quote her from multiple things just for the sake of accuracy. This is coming directly from the person that essentially launched this mission, and I quote, "I am now crawling URLs of all videos uploaded to Parler sequentially from latest to oldest. These are the original unprocessed raw files as uploaded to Parler with all associated metadata." She then posted other technical items and all of that, but she ended that particular tweet string with, and I quote, "The crawl is now complete. 1,098,552 video URLs. Now, as the data was being copied out, tech analysts and writers started sifting through this data, plus taking a look at just how insecure that API was and what it led to. One of these tech writers was Matthew Sheffield, and basically he said, according to him, that the breach was possible due to the lax standards that I'm talking about. And to quote him, "Once Parler's two-factor authentication feature was disabled, because it was designed for developer convenience rather than security, anyone with knowledge could have become an administrator, and that's how Parler just got owned." Now, Sheffield blames the potential leak on the app, quote, "never actually deleting anything its users posted, while keeping the data accessible to administrators." That's right. We were finding out that if a Parler user actually deleted something like, "Oh God, I was in the Capitol, I need to delete this and scrub this data before I basically get arrested by law enforcement," you were deleting it. So Parler itself may have removed it from the view of you as a user and all of your connections or friends on Parler, but it never actually deleted it. It was still there. And it gets worse for Parler users, because Sheffield also tweeted out on January 11th, and I quote, "I haven't confirmed this yet, but it's possible that among the not actually deleted data might be the archived photos of the state identification cards that Parler invited users who wanted to be verified to upload." Now, the person who started this off also clarified on the 11th, this is the self-proclaimed hacker from Austria, she clarified on the 11th as to what her and her cohort were able to replicate, and I quote her tweet directly, "Only things that were available publicly via the web were archived. I don't have your email address, phone, or credit card number unless you posted it on Parler." So meaning, it is very possible, with what we are learning from Matthew Sheffield, as well as the original person that started this, if, let's say, I went to get verified on Parler and gave them my driver's license so they knew I could get that little check mark or however Parler verifies you, it is possible that as Parler, quote unquote, deleted that, it basically maintained in the system, and that was capable or possible of being copied out. Now, news reports from major publications at this time were also misreporting what exactly was taken or how it was accomplished, which is actually what led me to my correction here at the start of this video. As I mentioned, I read multiple sources, but I'm always transparent where my sources come from. And so if multiple sources that are, let's say, tier 1 are getting it wrong, the APs and all of that of the world, then I'm also going to get it wrong as well. Now, this is beyond damning for Parler users, essentially those that were at the Capitol, and also possibly past demonstrations where crimes were committed by them or, let's say, a group of people they belong to. We are still sifting through all of this data. I've also backed up personally a ton of this information now, and basically there are sites that are putting this out basically with videos and GPS locations. There is a Google map out there that literally has the pins of the GPS metadata from Parler users that were there, and it links to video. And sometimes, as they stated, this is video that was in processing, so sometimes it's audio, sometimes it's video with the audio, whatever it is, it's out there. You can click on it, you can watch it or listen to it, and you can see where it was tagged. Obviously, when you have an area that is saturated that heavily with mobile devices and phones, the GPS tagging puts you in the vicinity, but it's not 100% correct. Not to mention, let's say the building itself. I believe the law enforcement might have been using stingrays because I've heard on videos that a lot of people didn't have signals, which means they might have walked out, of the building and then were able to upload it or upload it later on. But you can actually see these and watch these and download them yourself, if you want to keep them for posterity. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it also dovetails with my video from yesterday, because we're now learning that the FBI has received almost 150,000 pieces of digital evidence. I stated yesterday over 100,000. They are continuing to increase that number as reporting comes in. Much of that data is thanks to what these people did to exfiltrate all of this data. So in other words, if you were trying to scrub and erase the evidence of yourself possibly committing a crime at the Capitol, they got it. They really did. And that's pretty amazing. We know it's also actionable because my video from the other day, I extensively quote a state's attorney, a criminal prosecutor that I spoke to regarding this entire situation. So this is a very serious problem for those involved. Law enforcement has been making multiple arrests, and we're now starting to see the legal system kick in as these people are starting to go through arraignments and eventually trials. So that is crazy. And those were your breaches of the week. Were you affected? Let me know. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.